The chill of the evening seeped into my bones as I stepped into the cramped chamber hidden beneath the market's restless heart. Ira was already there, her fiery hair a beacon amid the shadows, eyes sharp and unyielding as ever. The room smelled of dust and old parchment, scattered maps and cryptic symbols strewn across the worn wooden table. We whispered, voices low but urgent, weaving plans from threads of information and fragile hope. Malrek tightens his grip. Ira's voice was steady, but I caught the edge of worry beneath. The auction draws near, and his faction moves like shadows, closing ranks. We don't have much time. I nodded, running a hand through my braid, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. The prophecy, once a promise of clarity, now a harbinger of chaos, was the fulcrum on which our fate teetered. "We need every ally we can trust," I whispered, "and every piece of information." The door creaked softly, and Joran slipped inside, his lean frame hunched against the cold. His hood shadowed his features, but his eyes gleamed with urgency. "They're mobilizing faster than we thought," he murmured, pressing a folded scrap of paper into my palm. "Malrek's men intercepted a courier carrying news of our movements. We're exposed." A knot tightened in my stomach. The fate market was a living beast, its pulse quickening with whispered betrayals and shifting loyalties. Yet we had no choice but to press forward. "Ira, ready the others. Joran, keep your ears open any movement, any shift in the market, and tell me immediately." That night, I sought Master Orin's counsel. His chamber was a sanctuary of silence, lit only by flickering candles that cast long shadows against ancient scrolls and faded tapestries. The elder seer sat beneath a towering window, his silver hair catching the moonlight like a halo. His eyes, clouded by age but sharp with wisdom, met mine without judgment. "The silence of the divine grows heavier," he said softly, voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "Fate itself holds its breath, waiting for the moment to speak or to remain forever mute." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling deep inside me. What must I do? How do I face a future that might not answer? He placed a frail hand over mine. "You carry a burden not just of prophecy, but of choice. Remember, Kayla, fate is not merely a chain to bind us, but a key to unlock what lies beyond. Courage will be your lantern in the gathering shadow." The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Allies gathered quietly, old friends, cautious acquaintances, those who still believed in the fragile promise I represented. We mapped out strategies, rehearsed contingencies, and steeled ourselves for the storm we knew was coming. On the eve of the confrontation, I stood atop a rooftop overlooking the sprawling city. The labyrinth of lights flickered like distant stars. The markets hum a distant heartbeat beneath the night's embrace. Wind tugged at my braid, whispering secrets I could almost hear but not yet understand. I closed my eyes, summoning the resolve that had carried me through exile and despair. The prophecy was not just a thing to be reclaimed, was a destiny to be rewritten. Whatever the cost, I would face Malrek and the darkness he sought to unleash. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I felt the weight of the gathering shadow and the fragile promise of dawn intertwined. The battle for fate's soul was about to begin, and I would be ready. But in the depths of my mind, a question lingered, sharper than any blade. Was courage enough to defy a destiny already written in shadows? The answer awaited me in the storm ahead, where hope and despair would collide, and the fragile threads of tomorrow would be stretched to their breaking point. I took a deep breath, turned from the cityscape, and descended into the night ready to face whatever darkness came next. The air inside the dim chamber was thick, weighted with the scent of aged parchment and the quiet rustling of stolen documents spread before us. Flickering candlelight cast long shadows that danced like restless spirits across the cracked stone walls. I sat hunched over the table, my storm-grey eyes scanning the intricate lines of script and the cryptic symbols that only I could decipher. Ira stood close by, her fiery red hair a vivid flame against the muted gloom, her green eyes sharp and alert as she watched the door. "They're tightening their net," Ira whispered, her voice low but urgent. "Malrek's faction is moving faster than we thought. We need to act before the next auction." I nodded, swallowing the lump of dread that pressed against my throat. The prophecy, the first one sold, the one that had shattered my life and nearly unraveled the kingdom, was now a pawn in a dangerous game of power, greed, and ambition. Every faction in the fate market coveted it, but none so fiercely as Lord Malrek Davon. His scarred jaw and cold eyes haunted my thoughts, a reminder of what was at stake. The documents before us hinted at the next auction's location and a roster of key players. Mira, the broker with her silken layers of shadow and light, was due to attend. She was a paradox, profit-driven, yet oddly bound by a conscience that made her a reluctant ally. I had to find her before Malrek's agents did. Ira's sharp gaze caught mine. "We'll need to move swiftly. The market's pulse is quickening. The threads of fate are tightening around us." Moving through the labyrinthine corridors of the fate market was like threading a needle through a storm. Whispers of deals and broken promises brushed past us like the cold drafts that snuck in through cracked windows. Every face I passed was a mask, some friendly, many dangerous. The market was a living thing, pulsing with the hopes and fears of those who traded in futures. Finding Myra was no easy task. She was ensconced in a private parlor, surrounded by silks and shadows that seemed to shimmer with unspoken secrets. Her sharp features softened only slightly when she saw me, but her eyes remained cautious. "Kayla," she greeted, voice smooth yet edged with wariness. "I heard rumors you were planning to disrupt the auction. Dangerous, even for you." I met her gaze steadily. "The prophecy must be reclaimed. If it falls into Malrek's hands, it will mean ruin, not just for me, but for all of us." Myra's lips pressed into a thin line. "And what makes you think I want to help?" "Because you know as well as I do that the market cannot survive another disaster," I said. "Not if it destroys the fragile balance we've all come to depend on." A tense silence stretched between us before she finally nodded. "Very well, but we do this my way." Outside, the city's breath hung heavy in the cold night air. In a shadowed alley, Joran waited, his lean form barely visible beneath the tattered cloak that had long been his armor against the world. His eyes, sharp and darting, flicked nervously as I approached. "Trouble's coming," he whispered. "Malrek's men are watching the auction's perimeter. They've got spies everywhere. You're not just risking the prophecy, you're risking your life." I clenched my fists, the weight of my past mistakes pressing down harder than ever. But there was no turning back. The threads of fate were fraying, and only I could try to weave them back together. As dawn crept over the horizon, I found myself atop the stone steps overlooking the fate market. The fog clung stubbornly to the cobblestones, but the first light pierced the gloom, casting a fragile glow that promised possibility. I breathed deeply, the cold air filling my lungs with a sharp clarity. This was the edge of everything, the precipice where hope and despair met. I was no longer the broken oracle cast out by fate. I was the storm before the calm, the flicker of light in the shadowed future. Whatever lay ahead, I would face it with eyes wide open, ready to reclaim not just a prophecy, but my voice and my future. The market stirred below, alive with whispers and secrets. And somewhere in the shifting crowd, Malrek's eyes searched for me. The game was set. The fate of the world balanced precariously on the edge of a knife, and I was ready to tip the scales. The candlelight flickered unevenly, casting tall, wavering shadows against the ancient stone walls of the chamber where Kayla sat. Eyes closed, seeking a glimpse beyond the oppressive silence that had settled over her world. The room was a sanctuary of old knowledge, cramped space lined with tomes that smelled of dust and forgotten truths, their spines creaking softly as the night air stirred through a cracked window. Outside, the muted hum of the fate market pulsed faintly, like an unseen heartbeat of a realm teetering on the edge of chaos. Kella's breath slowed, her mind reaching out through the silence that had fallen over the divine. For weeks now, the voices that once whispered futures and warnings had gone mute. The prophecy she had sold, that devastating thread of fate woven by her own hand, now belonged to others. It was a knife pointed at the fragile balance of the world, and yet no celestial voice guided her steps or offered solace. The silence was deafening. Her fingers twitched, tracing faint cryptic symbols in the dust gathered at her feet. Each mark was a fragment of hope, a desperate attempt to clarify the tangled web of possibility. But within her chest, a storm raged, a tempest of guilt, fear, and an aching hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the future was not wholly written. Was the weight of destiny truly unbreakable, or could a fractured future be mended with courage and sacrifice? The sudden sharp rustle of paper shattered the fragile stillness. Ira Thane burst through the worn wooden door, her fiery red hair a blazing beacon against the dim room. Her green eyes flickered with urgency as she brandished a folded scrap of parchment, breath ragged from hurried steps. "Kayla," she gasped, voice low but fierce, "the auction ends sooner than we thought. The prophecy will be traded again within days." Kella's eyes opened, storm-grey orbs glinting with renewed focus. The tangible threat crystallized before her. "We must be ready," she whispered, voice hoarse but resolute. "Every moment lost brings us closer to disaster." Ira's gaze softened briefly, a flicker of the fierce loyalty that had carried them through countless perils. "I'll gather what allies I can. But Kayla, this path, it's darker than before." The weight of those words settled heavily. Kayla knew the cost of this journey was more than the mere risk of failure. It might demand the sacrifice of everything she held dear. The thought tightened her chest, but it also steeled her resolve. A slow, deliberate creak heralded the arrival of Master Orin. The elder seer appeared in the doorway, his silver hair catching the candlelight like threads of starlight. His eyes, clouded by the weight of years and sorrow, fixed on Kayla with a mixture of sympathy and warning. "You tread a dangerous path, child," he intoned, voice gravelly yet steady. "To alter fate is to wrestle with the very fabric of existence. Every thread pulled unravels others. Beware the price you may pay." Kayla rose, steady despite the tremors running through her. "And yet, Master, if I do nothing, the world will fall into ruin. I cannot stand idle, even if the cost is my own future." Orin's gaze softened, but the shadow behind it deepened. "Then steel your heart. The silence you feel is not absence, it is the waiting breath before the storm. You must decide what you are willing to lose to reclaim what was broken." That night, Kayla found herself on a rooftop, overlooking the sprawling city beneath a bruised twilight sky. The fate market sprawled like a living entity below, its chaos humming with the promise of both destruction and salvation. The murmur of distant crowds and the clinking of coins echoed against the cool air, but inside her, a quiet resolve took root. The fractures within her future mirrored those of the kingdom, broken threads waiting to be rewoven. She knew the path ahead would demand sacrifices, perhaps even the echoes of her own identity. But as the first stars pierced the darkening sky, Keller's heart beat with a fierce determination. The future was fractured, yes, but not yet undone. And in that fragile hope lay the beginning of a new fate. The night stretched long, and with it Keller's thoughts spiraled deeper. Memories of her past mistakes clawed at her resolve, each one a ghost whispering doubt. She recalled the faces lost to the war her prophecy had ignited. The kingdoms fractured and the trust shattered like glass. Yet beneath the weight of guilt, a stubborn ember of hope refused to die. Ira's presence was her anchor, the fiery-haired companion who had risen from the slums to navigate the treacherous underbelly of the Fate Market, was a living testament to resilience. Together, they pored over scraps of information, piecing together fragments of a strategy to intercept the auction. Every coded message, every whispered rumor, was a thread in the tapestry they sought to unravel. Master Orin's cryptic lessons echoed in her mind as well. The divine silence was not mere absence, but a challenger call to trust in oneself when the heavens offered no guidance. Kayla grappled with that truth, realizing that her role was not to be a mere vessel for prophecy, but an agent of change. Yet the question gnawed at her relentlessly. Could she carry the burden of rewriting destiny without becoming lost in its shadows? Would the sacrifices demanded be too great? This fracturing of her future was not only external but internal, a battle for her very soul. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the city in hues of gold and rose, Kayla knew the road ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. But the fractured future was no longer a prison, it was a crucible. And from its fires, she would forge a new path. The stale air of the underground chamber hung heavy with the scent of damp stone and burning torches. Kayla Varys stood motionless, her storm-grey eyes fixed on the figure before her. Lord Malrek Davon, tall and imposing, loomed like a shadow cast by ambition itself. His scarred jaw tightened as he spoke, his voice cold and measured. Around him, a small assembly of his followers waited in silence, the flickering firelight casting jagged shadows that danced across their faces. "The Fate Market will bend to order," Malrek declared, his gaze sweeping the room with an unyielding certainty. "Chaos breeds weakness. Only through control can the realm survive the coming storm." Kayla's heart tightened. She had known ambition could be a double-edged sword, but witnessing it wielded so ruthlessly was a sting that cut deeper than any prophecy she had ever uttered. This was no mere political maneuver. This was a purge of dissent, a calculated march to absolute dominion. Ira's hurried footsteps echoed down the stone corridor as she burst into the chamber moments later. Her fiery red hair disheveled, and her green eyes wide with urgency. Bruises marked her pale skin, evidence of a recent scuffle. "Kayla," she gasped, clutching a folded parchment. "Malrek's reach extends further than we feared. An entire family, innocent and unarmed, was destroyed today for refusing to swear loyalty. The market's underbelly bleeds with their silence." The words hit Kayla like a physical blow. She gripped the wooden pillar beside her, the rough grain grounding her amidst the storm of emotions swirling inside her. How many more must suffer? She whispered, the weight of her own past mistakes pressing down. Jorin, the street informant, appeared then, his lean frame blending into the shadows. "There's more," he murmured, his voice grim. "Burned homes, families torn apart, all in Malrek's name." Keller's mind raced. Every fragment of information painted a darker mosaic of Malrek's center web, woven with cruelty and fear. Her mission had never felt more perilous. Later, in the ornate auction hall, where the Fate Market's power plays unfolded like a deadly game of chess, Kayla confronted Malrek directly. The room buzzed with whispered speculation, a sea of finely dressed nobles and shadowed figures, each poised to claim futures as commodities. Their eyes locked across the crowded floor, the years of pain and betrayal simmering beneath the surface. "You play with lives as if they were mere tokens," Kayla accused, her voice steady despite the storm raging within. Malrek's cold smile was a blade. "And what would you have me do? Let chaos reign. There is power in order, Kayla. Power you once wielded, but now fear to grasp." The tension was palpable, a fragile thread stretched taut between them. Around them, the murmurs grew louder, the spectators sensing the impending clash. When the meeting adjourned, Joran guided Kayla through winding alleyways to a ruined quarter of the city. The devastation was raw and unmistakable, charred remains of homes, displaced families huddled in makeshift shelters, and the haunting silence of lives uprooted. Kayla knelt beside a small child clutching a tattered doll. The innocence lost was a cruel reminder of the stakes. "This is the true price of power," she said softly, her voice breaking the quiet night. "Not just the futures we sell, but the lives sacrificed in the shadows." Ira placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We fight not just for prophecy, but for those who cannot." Kayla nodded, the haunted desperation in her chest mingling with a fragile hope. Her resolve crystallized, not just to reclaim the prophecy, but to confront the darkness that ambition had cast upon their world. But with each step she took against Malrek's tide, the dangers multiplied. The noose tightened, and the cost of defiance loomed ever larger. Yet within the weight of sacrifice lay the faintest glimmer of redemption, if only she could seize it before all was lost. As the chapter closed, Keller's gaze lifted to the distant horizon, where shadow and light intertwined. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and moral quandaries. Yet the courage to face the cost of power was the first step toward reclaiming a future not written in darkness, but forged by her own hand. The Fate Market awaited, its pulse quickening with each passing moment, and Kayla Varys was ready to meet it, come what may. The chamber was steeped in shadows cast by flickering candlelight, the air thick with the scent of aged parchment and faint smoke curling from a low burning brazier. Kayla Varys stood at the center, her storm-grey eyes flicking across the ancient scrolls spread before her on the oak table. The walls themselves seemed to hum with whispered secrets, covered in faded tapestries embroidered with symbols older than the kingdom itself. Here, in this secluded sanctuary far from the chaos of the Fate Market, she sought answers that had eluded her for years. Irathane stood by the heavy wooden door, her fiery hair aflame against the dimness, green eyes sharp and watchful. The distant murmurs of the market beyond were muted, but their presence was a constant reminder of the world Kayla had once been part of, and the corruption that now festered within it. This place was different quiet, steeped in the weight of history and loss. Master Orin sat opposite Kayla, his silver hair soft in the candlelight, and eyes clouded but piercing with wisdom. His voice was low and deliberate, each word measured as if carrying the gravity of the ages. "The Fate Market, as it stands, is not a creation of mere mortal greed," he began, his gaze steady. "It is the consequence of a breach of humanity reaching beyond its place, grasping at the threads of destiny itself." Keller's fingers traced the edges of a scroll, its ink faded but the symbols still sharp in her mind. "Explain," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. Orin nodded, leaning forward. Long ago, before the rise of kingdoms and the commodification of futures, prophecy was sacred. The divine spoke through chosen seers, their voices clear and unbroken. But as mankind's ambition grew, so did their desire to control fate, to bend it to their will. The fate market was born from that desire, a place where futures could be bought, sold, and traded as commodities. Ira's eyes narrowed at this, but that tampering, it must have consequences. Indeed, Orin replied gravely. The divine silence, the absence of clear prophetic voices, is the direct result. The gods withdrew their guidance, silenced by the hubris of mortals. Prophecies became fragmented, unreliable, and subject to manipulation. The market thrives on this silence, feeding on uncertainty and fear. Keller's heart tightened. This truth was both a revelation and a burden. The silence she had so often felt, the void where divine insight should have been, was no accident, but a wound inflicted by human hands. "Is there a way to restore the balance?" Kayla asked, desperation threading her voice. Orin's eyes held a flicker of hope. "The path is perilous. It requires more than knowledge. It demands courage to face the consequences of undoing what was done. The threads of fate are tangled, and to unravel one is to risk unraveling all." As the hours unfolded, Orin recounted legends of the first breach between divine will and mortal ambition, of seers who had once walked the realms of spirit and flesh, and the sacrifices made to keep prophecy pure. Kayla listened, absorbing every word, her mind weaving these fragments into a tapestry of understanding. Ira shifted beside her, the practical side of Kayla's nature anchoring her to the present. "We have to use this knowledge," she said firmly. "The factions controlling the fate market won't want this uncovered. They'll fight to keep the silence intact." Kayla nodded, feeling the weight of the truth settle over her like a mantle. The prophecy she had sold, the one that shattered her life, was but a single thread in a vast web of lost destinies and hidden agendas. When dawn's first light seeped through the chamber's narrow window, Kayla rose, her resolve tempered by the revelations. Stepping into the twilight outside, the chaotic glow of the fate market flickered in the distance like a restless flame. The silence of the divine was no longer a mystery, but a call to action. She would confront the shadows beneath the veil, not just to reclaim a prophecy, but to restore the fragile balance between fate and free will. The path ahead was uncertain, cloaked in darkness and danger, but Kayla Veres was no longer the broken oracle of the past. She was a beacon of hope, and the dawn awaited her courage. Yet, as she moved forward, a cold whisper of doubt lingered at the edges of her mind. How much of the past could truly be undone, and at what cost? The silence was deep, and the fate market thrummed with secrets that could unravel more than destinies. They could shatter the very world she sought to save. But in that uncertain moment, beneath the veil of shadows and ancient truths, Kayla chose to believe, to fight, to hope,